Chapter 4. Natural Learning. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor terrace with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrow may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. Khalil Gibran, the Prophet. Curiosity is children's main motivation to learn. Curiosity will lead them to know everything they need to know. When we send children to a kindergarten or school and impose teaching upon them, we suppress this curiosity. They are taught content that may not interest them in that specific time, or maybe not at all. Sitting in a classroom a few hours a day, obeying the teacher's instructions, does not fulfill their genetic expectations. In this chapter, I would like to put forward a different approach called natural learning, or unschooling. What is natural learning? Unschooling, or natural learning, sometimes also called child-led learning or self-directed education, is an approach to learning and raising children that is based on curiosity. The term unschooling was coined by John Holt. Holt was a primary school teacher in the US in the second half of the 20th century. Throughout his career, he grew disillusioned with the school system. He observed how schools inhibited learning and gradually came to the conclusion that an entirely different approach was needed. Learning as a natural process. Learning is a natural process. It happens spontaneously, and in fact, starts already in the womb. We learn to talk and walk and pick up all the information and skills we need in order to live, survive, and thrive. Learning does not need to be induced or imposed. The word school comes from the ancient Greek word, which means leisure. For the ancient Greeks, learning happened spontaneously, when one is free to explore. Learning can often hardly be distinguished from play. In fact, play is probably how children learn most things in life in traditional tribal societies. They play at activities that adults do, like cooking, gathering, or building, until their play is no longer distinguishable from the real thing. Their learning is inseparable from life. Similarly, in medieval times in the West, children's lives were still barely separated from adult lives. Anthropologist Colin Turnbull says, "For children, life is one long frolic, and one day they find that the games they have been playing are not games any longer, but the real thing, for they have become adults. It happens so gradually that they hardly notice the change at first. For even when they are proud and famous hunters, their life is still full of fun and laughter." So our main job as an adult is to trust in the child's innate ability to learn. If we are afraid that they will not learn, this may reduce their confidence to explore. Children need to feel that even though they may be inexperienced and make mistakes, they are innately able to learn. In schools, however, children are not accepted unconditionally. Rather, they are controlled, evaluated, and confronted with their mistakes. In schools, learning is initiated and organized by teachers in a rigid way. John Holt writes, "Most people now seem to believe that learning is separate from the rest of life, that we only do it or do it best when we are not doing anything else, and best of all in a place where nothing else is done. Schools assume that if children are left to their own devices, they will waste their time playing and learn very little. In order to enforce their teaching, schools need a system of punishment and reward. Yet learning and growth are inner processes. One should not try to force them to happen from the outside. Learning is driven by curiosity. Children are naturally curious to the world around them. They want to see, touch, and feel everything, and probably smell and taste it too. We are born with a desire to understand our environment. Therefore, learning is a self-rewarding and intrinsically motivating endeavor. When we are curious, it means we are ready to learn something. Curiosity signals our brain is neurologically mature to take in certain information or develop certain skills. When we are ready, learning happens effortlessly. If we are forced to learn something at the wrong moment, we will have difficulties. This may even be the cause of learning disorders. At Sudbury Valley School, where children learn to read and write when they want to, there has never been a case of dyslexia. In schools, we are simply not allowed to follow our curiosity. We have to learn what the teacher tells us and when he or she tells us to, whether we are curious about it or not. Albert Einstein puts it very distinctly. It is, in fact, nothing short of a miracle that the modern methods of instruction have not yet entirely strangled the holy curiosity of inquiry. For this delicate little plant, aside from stimulation, stand mainly in need of freedom. Without this, it goes to wreck and ruin without fail. Learning becomes a chore in school. Schools put us at risk of losing our joy of learning. Homework and exams definitely do not improve upon this. In fact, in schools, enjoyment is often even thought to get in the way of learning. Schools curtail and systemize learning. We all have to learn the same thing at the same time in the same way. However, everybody is different and develops along a different path and at a different pace. Adult supremacy. Underlying the convictions of modern schooling is the idea that adults are superior to children, and therefore should have the authority over them. Children do not know what is good for them and cannot be free to find out. John Holt writes, "The educator tells us in effect that we cannot be trusted even to think, that we must depend on others to tell us the meaning of our world and our lives, and that any meaning we may make for ourselves out of our own experience has no value. I call this adult supremacy. Others have called it adultism. It is a form of discrimination similar to racism and sexism. Just like racism and sexism, it designates a different value to and allows different behavior towards a group of people based on them belonging to a certain social group, race, gender, or age. We allow ourselves to treat children in ways which we adults would never want to be treated. If I would force you to sit in a classroom and listen to me all day, having to ask permission to talk and to go to the toilet, you would be upset. However, doing this to children seems to be business as usual. It is hard for me to believe we know better than children just because we are older. If anything, we know worse. We are born in a different time. Our children will live in the future we cannot even begin to imagine. Children's souls dwells in the house of tomorrow, which we cannot visit, as Khalil Gibran writes. We simply cannot look inside our children's heads. They know best what their needs are, and we should give them the space to express those needs. Hunter-gatherer tribes seem to hold the same idea and never tell children what to do. At the risk of overgeneralizing, One could say that hunter-gatherers are fiercely egalitarian and that they don't tell anyone, not even a child, to do anything. Generalizing or overgeneralizing further, small-scale societies appear to be not nearly as convinced as are we of the idea that parents are responsible for a child's development and that they can influence how a child turns out. I think adult supremacy can be counterproductive. When you try to control people, they will try and rebel against you. Nobody likes being told what to do, including children. Having a sense of autonomy is extremely important for a child's development, and for anyone else for that matter. If we curtail their freedom, they will often throw tantrums. That is how they express their feelings, definitely at an early age. They are not yet able to express their needs in a more articulate way. Yet often we do not take their cries seriously and overrule them by virtue of authority and physical superiority. I believe our role is like the bow in Gibran's poem. We are just here to support children to find their own path and not to force anything on them. I myself, for instance, am vegan and have been for many years. Even though veganism is very important to me, I never told my children they should be vegan. I do not want them to be vegan. I only want them to be one thing, and that is themselves. If one of my daughters would open a steakhouse, I would gladly come to the opening to support her in realizing her dreams and eat a salad. Innate goodness. At the bottom of all of this, natural learning starts from the belief in the innate goodness of the child. We can have trust in the natural tendencies of the child because we are designed by nature to learn. We can trust our inner nature. Children are like seeds that already have all the biological programming in them to grow into mature beings. They just need a compassionate and caring environment to bring out these innate qualities. It may be a cliche, but love and acceptance are what our children need the most. Our modern school system, however, was based on religious Christian schools whose principles believed that our nature was sinful and our desire needed to be controlled and corrected, as is evidenced by this quote of Lutheran theologian Hermann Frankl. Youth do not know how to regulate their lives and are naturally inclined toward idle and sinful behavior when left to their own devices. For this reason, it is a rule in this institution that a pupil never be allowed out of the presence of a supervisor. The supervisor's presence will stifle the pupil's inclination to sinful behavior and slowly weaken his willfulness. The schools founded by Frank in early 18th century Prussia would become a model for later mass education systems. The history of our schools. The modern school system is a relatively recent invention. Compulsory mass education only came up in the 19th century in the West and spread to the rest of the world in the 20th century. Before that, nearly everyone learned what they needed for their lives through their interactions with their family and community members. Up until the beginning of the 20th century, for instance, a significant number of professions were learned through a system of apprenticeship. If we want to understand our educational system, we have to take a look at how exactly it came into being. The advent of mass education was closely tied to the changing political and economic environment of the time. The power of religious institutions and monarchy was waning. The 19th century witnessed the rise of a new political and economic order through the modern nation-state, capitalism, and industrial revolution. From the beginning, the education system was meant to serve this new order. Children had to be molded into its willing servitors. Emphasis was put on obedience and conformity. Education served to make the state more powerful and prosperous, not to fulfill the psychological needs of children, let alone to help them find their own path and be happy, independent, and creative. We just need to take a look at the writing of some early educational reformers to understand their drive for conformity. To quote Hermann Frank again, "It is necessary to break the natural willfulness of the child. The schoolmaster's most important task is that of making the will obedient." Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the most influential philosophers of the time, wrote in Emily, or On Education, his seminal work on education. Good social institutions are those that best know how to denature man, to take his absolute existence from him in order to give him a relative one and transport the I into the common unity. And Thomas Jefferson, founding father and third president of the USA, said, "Education would have raised the mass of the people to the high ground of moral respectability necessary to their own safety and to orderly government." Their vision is clear. Education is a tool of law and order rather than self-development. Critics today still argue that the education system preserves the status quo and produces professionals that do not question the political and economic system. Social critic Paul Goodman writes, "It is in the schools and from the mass media that the mass of our citizens in all classes learn that life is inevitably routine, depersonalized, vainly graded, that it is best to toe the mark and shut up. This education is miseducation, socializing to the national norms and regimenting to the national needs." Sociologists Samuel Bowles and Herbert Gintis call this the correspondence principle. The values taught and practiced in schools, such as obedience to authority and dependency on external rewards, what they call the hidden curriculum, corresponds to the values expected of employees in the workplace. What research teaches us about learning. There is not much research done on unschooling as such. But in the second half of the 20th century, new models of learning came up in psychology and cognitive science that may provide a theoretical underpinning for it. In this paragraph, we will discuss constructivism and self-determination theory. In different ways, these two theories turn traditional views of learning on which the school system still heavily relies upside down. Constructivism argues against learning as a passive knowledge transfer. Self-determination theory shows how punishment and reward are ineffective and how autonomy and intrinsic motivation are essential in learning. Constructivism. In the school system, students are traditionally treated as passive and submissive receivers of knowledge. The teacher is the authority that possesses the knowledge and transfers it, while the student absorbs and reproduces. Learning is a mechanical process that can be quantified and graded. Learning mostly happens out of context, behind closed doors, in the classrooms and textbooks. Theories are taught in abstract ways. Complex issues are broken down and sequenced into easily digestible pieces. Constructivism, on the other hand, says that learning is an active process. The theory is based on the groundbreaking work of psychologists such as Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. According to constructivism, the learner is not copy-pasting what someone else is teaching. Learning is a dynamic process. The learner is actively creating meaning and constantly trying to make sense of the world around him or her, interpreting and reinterpreting, questioning and finding answers as he goes along. Learning happens spontaneously in interaction with people and society. The teacher should not have an authoritarian role, but rather one of a facilitator and a guide. The teacher's goal should not be to drill the student, but rather to empower them. Moreover, learning is not an alien procedure that needs to be imposed. Rather, it is a deeply rooted in our biological and evolutionary nature. Constructivism gave rise to plenty of attempts at school and curriculum reform. It brought forth pedagogies such as authentic learning, active learning, problem-based learning, and experiential learning. These approaches sought to bring about change inside the classroom. None of them questioned whether the school system itself was an appropriate environment for learning. One could argue that unschooling takes the insights of constructivism to the next level. Just because learning is such an interactive process, it makes no sense to force children to sit in classrooms being told by the teacher what to do. The school system itself decontextualizes all learning and inhibits the freedom needed for a student to actively engage in his own learning and meaning-making process. Self-determination theory. Another research-based argument for natural learning comes from motivation theory, more specifically from self-determination theory, SDT, started with psychologists Edward Dacey and Richard Ryan in the 1970s. It is an overarching framework to understand how human beings develop and how they can flourish. The theory sees human behavior as motivated by three basic needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. In order to make human beings grow, their environment needs to support these basic needs. Failure to meet these needs will lead to emotional distress and maladaptive behavior. One of the key components of the theory is the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. An intrinsically motivated behavior is something you do because you enjoy doing it. There is no need for reward here, because doing it is in itself rewarding. Curiosity, for instance, is an intrinsic motivation, as is play, pleasure, interest, or the need for creativity or challenge. So, one could say that unschooling is more focused on intrinsic types of motivation. An extrinsically motivated behavior, on the other hand, is performed because of the result you hope to obtain from it. You do something because you will get a reward or want to avoid punishment. You do it because of the social effects it has, such as receiving praise or fame or avoiding shame. Or you do it because you believe it is important or it corresponds to your values. So in school, for instance, we can learn in order to get a good grade, to avoid upsetting our parents, or because we believe in the importance of a diploma. Curiosity is less in the limelight in schools, as schools tend to focus more on extrinsic motivation. One of Ryan's and Dacey's most surprising findings was that rewards reduce intrinsic motivation. So school, with its system of rewarding through grades, undermines motivation. This is something we probably all have experienced at some point in our lives. We can start out doing something, for example, a certain job, because we like it. But after a while, we find that the only thing keeping us going is the money, the extrinsic reward. Or we choose to study a certain subject because it interests us. But after a while, the only thing we can think of is how to pass the next exam. Our work or study becomes a chore, something we feel we have to do, rather than something we enjoy doing. Why does this loss of intrinsic motivation happen? As mentioned before, people have a need for autonomy and competence. External motivators undermine these needs. External motivators can be rewards like money or evolutions, but also punishments, deadlines, competition, negative feedback, and even some type of positive feedback. They give people the feeling someone is trying to control them and that they are being forced to perform well. And so, they lose intrinsic motivation. Why is it so important to have intrinsic motivation instead of extrinsic motivation? Rewards still motivate people, just in a different way, one could argue. Sometimes rewards may lead people to do things that they would otherwise never have done, but that over time turns out to be intrinsically rewarding. Yet, the research shows that intrinsic motivation improves creativity, flexibility, and persistence. It leads to more satisfaction, better performance, and more overall well-being. With regard to learning, intrinsic motivation brings about deeper and better conceptual understanding. Extrinsic motivation for learning, on the other hand, can lead to more behavioral problems in the classroom, loss of interest, and dropout. So how does all this relate to unschooling? If we want to nourish intrinsic motivation, we have to create an environment where people feel they're autonomous, competent, and related. People should feel they have some freedom to choose what to do and how to do it. And especially with children, they should feel supported if you want them to be curious and explore. Schools with their curriculums, schedules, and strict behavioral rules cannot provide such an environment. Unschooling champions autonomy and self-directed learning. In my opinion, it encourages people to face challenges and feel competent. As mentioned earlier, it starts from a position of connection and trust between children and parents. There is a fundamental trust in the child's competence and capacity to learn. If anything, unschooling seems to be the approach to learning that may well encourage self-determination the most. Edward Dacey himself writes how he started his research because he saw how schools usually destroy children's innate sense of curiosity and exploration. A child's curiosity is an astonishing source of energy. Children explore, manipulate, and question. They pick things up, shake them, taste them, throw them, and ask, "What's this?" They try things, bend things, and transform one thing into another. They seek the novel, and they are eager to learn. Clearly, something in them is alive and vital. Something in them wants to master the challenges of their lives. For young children, learning is a primary occupation. It is what they do naturally and with considerable intensity when they are not preoccupied with satisfying their hunger or dealing with their parents' demands. But one of the most troubling problems we face in this culture is that as children grow older, they suffer a profound loss. In schools, for example, they seem to display so little of the natural curiosity and excitement about learning that was patently evident in those very same children when they were 3 or 4 years old. What has happened? Why is it that so many of today's students are unmotivated, when it could not be more clear that they were born with a natural desire to learn? Growing without schooling. Free children, supported by unconditional love, growing and flourishing independently, carving their own unique path across the universe. It may seem like a utopia to you. Yet, it does not have to be. I have seen it happen with my own children, and the children of many others who chose the same path. That does not mean this is an easy road. It definitely comes with its own challenges. In this paragraph, I will try to give you some concrete advice on how to put these ideals into practice and to help children learn naturally. In general, we can refer here again to the attachment theory explained in the previous chapter. Children mainly need support and independence if they are to grow into happy and sociable human beings. Let the child choose. The main thing is, do not tell your children what they should do or learn. If they feel like playing all day, they can play all day. Eventually, they will get curious about something. Then, just let them come to you with any questions they may have. Young children naturally ask lots of questions, and school, with all its structure, curricula, and textbooks, does not always allow a lot of space for this. One important remark: if children ask something, answer them only insofar as they are interested. Do not give them an entire lecture after one small question. This may annoy them and discourage them from asking questions next time. If they want to know or learn something and you do not have the answer, you can go looking for the answer together, online or in the library. Or you can go and find someone who can explain or teach them. If they want to learn to play the guitar, for instance, you can offer them a guitar teacher. Unschooling does not mean that there can be no classes or teachers. It just means that the child should decide freely if and with whom they want to take classes. If the child is self-motivated, they will be so much more passionate about what they are doing. Unschooling does not even have to mean that children cannot go to school. They can go, but only if they want to. My oldest daughter chose to go to school at the age of 13. She was the most motivated kid in her class because she was the only one who chose to be there. Unschooling is not the same as homeschooling. Homeschooling usually means that you teach children more or less the same curriculum as in school. Yet instead of doing it in school, you just do it at home. This is not unschooling. In unschooling, there can be no fixed curriculum. The children themselves can choose what to explore, when, how, and with whom. Be available for your children. Unschooling will usually mean you spend a lot of time with your children, much more than most Western people commonly do today. In Western families, often both parents have jobs. Maternal leave lasts for a few months maximum. Paternal leave, if any, much less. After parental leave, parents usually go back to work and children are sent to nurseries, kindergartens, and schools. We outsource raising our children for a large part to various institutions where they are taken care of by professionals whom we usually hardly know. Outsourcing education can be convenient, of course, but is it the best for our child? If we send our children to school, we can continue our careers and other endeavors without too much disturbance. Yet, as we noted in the previous chapter, the question is, how well suited this is to our children's genetic expectations. Children need the presence and support of their parents or primary caregivers. Why do you think the first day of school is such a traumatizing event for many children? Why do we send our kids away to be with strangers as soon as we can? Who else can love a child better and more than their own parents? Unschooling constitutes the conscious choice to make our children central to our lives again. For many unschooling parents, this involves working part-time, working from home, or only one parent working. It means we may have to cut back on income. But how much does that really matter to the child? Children do not care very much whether they grow up in a palace or a hut. What they do care about is whether they can be with their parents and receive their love and care. Being with my children is nourishing and exciting. Otherwise, why would I conceive them to begin with? For many unschooling parents, children are a source of joy, not a burden. We would not want to pay someone else in order to relieve us from it. Raising self-conscious and healthy children is a natural part of life for us. We are the bows from which our children, as living arrows, are sent forth, as the poet says. Of course, this might not be the case for everyone. Not everyone enjoys or is able to spend all the time with their children. Unschooling is not for each and every parent. Some may have career or life goals that conflict with this. Others might not be emotionally or physically able to provide such care. For children in broken families, torn apart by abuse, violence, alcohol, or drugs, it may be safer to be in school than to be with their families. I would not want to force anyone to unschool. Forcing anyone to do anything contradicts the very concept of unschooling. I just want everyone to be aware that there are alternatives to the common practices, so that they can make conscious and well-informed decisions about raising their children. Unschooling our children also requires us to do substantial work on ourselves. Agreeing with these ideas is one thing. Putting them into practice and actually parenting in a non-coercive and supportive way is a whole other thing. If you want to try it, I recommend to connect to people who have experience and seek their support. We have been conditioned for so long by our own parents and by the school system that it is difficult for us to change. John Holt was quoted saying that it is easier to take a child out of school than to take the school out of our heads. We will have to become aware of our habit patterns and transform them. This is not an easy job, and again, it might not be for everyone. There is also another alternative. If you're not able to spend that much time on raising your children and working on yourself, but you still believe in self-directed learning, your children could go to a so-called free school. Free schools are pretty much based on the same principles as unschooling. The only thing these schools have in common with regular schools is that there is a school campus. All the rest is quite different. Classes are optional, and students can engage in any activity they like: play, study, arts and crafts, etc. The teachers do not hold any authority over the children. They are just there to help them to learn specific things when they want to. Often these schools are organized in a democratic way, so-called democratic schools. And children and staff have an equal say in the rules and functioning of the school. Communicate and compromise. We should treat children as fully responsible members of our community. In Sadhana Forest, the community where I live, we usually advise the following to newcomers. Treat children the way you would treat adults. Or even better, treat them like you would want to be treated yourself. We believe that, from an early age on, we can have mature conversations with children and give them independence. If we want children to grow up to be responsible, we have to give them responsibility. If we want them to learn to make their own choices, we have to give them the freedom to choose and explore on their own. Hunter-gatherer tribes seem to have a similar attitude toward children. As one anthropologist writes about a tribe in the Amazon, the Pirhas view that children are equal citizens of the society means that there is no prohibition that applies to children but does not equally apply to adults, and vice versa. They have to decide for themselves to do or not to do what their society expects of them. Eventually, they learn that it is in their best interests to listen to their parents a bit. So, for instance, when a child engages in a behavior we do not enjoy or we find dangerous, we do not try to stop them by force. Rather, we engage in a conversation with them. We try to sit down with them and explain how we feel about what they are doing and why we would like them to do otherwise. We do not try to command or force them to obey, however. We also take their needs and emotions seriously. Therefore, we always try to look for a compromise. Instead of saying no, we try to offer an alternative that can satisfy everyone's needs. I will tell you a story of my own daughter. When she was 1 year old, she was very inquisitive and would crawl to the electricity socket with a fork, wanting to explore it. My friends told me to beat her on the hand so she would stop doing this. This just did not feel right to me. So I rushed to the nearest hardware store and I brought a new electricity socket that was identical to the one on the wall. I gave the new socket to my daughter and explained her this one was safer to play with as it was not connected to electricity. She was just as happy playing with the new socket, and she never crawled to the socket in the wall again. If we try to force children, they may obey us, but they will probably do it out of fear, guilt, or shame. It does not encourage them to empathize with our emotions or listen to our needs. If we want children to listen to our needs and feelings, we have to share those with them and give them the freedom to act out of empathy and understanding. We also have to show empathy towards their needs and feelings. Bullying them into a behavior may seem very efficient at first, but it usually does not lead to the emotional sensitivity and moral uprightness we want to achieve. What will become of them? When people consider unschooling, one fear always comes up. What will become of our children? Will they learn how to read and write? Will they find a job? It is normal for this insecurity to come up. You are choosing to not go down the beaten path. You are going down a road and you do not know where it leads. Once again, it is important to have trust in the capacity of your child. It is built to learn. Luckily, you're not the first one to choose this path, and there are some indications that unschooled children usually end up well. Nearly all the unschooled children I have met were very passionate and motivated learners and did not have difficulty finding their way into adulthood. And yes, they all learned how to read and write, be it at different ages. A few surveys of unschooled children have been carried out. These indicate they are generally happy with their learning experience and do not have significant difficulties getting into college or finding a job. Researchers Gina Riley and Peter Gray write, they claim that their experiences as unschoolers prepared them well for further education and employment by promoting a high degree of self-motivation, continued enjoyment of learning, capacity for self-direction, and sense of personal responsibility. Another indication comes from reports from aforementioned free schools. The two perhaps most famous free schools, Summerhill School in the UK and Sudbury Valley School in the US, both report that the majority of their students were happy with their education and quite easily found themselves doing a wide variety of jobs. A Sudbury Valley alumni research paper reads, although these individuals educated themselves in ways that are enormously different from what occurs at traditional schools, they have had no apparent difficulty being admitted to or adjusting to the demands of traditional higher education, and have been successful in a wide variety of careers. Graduates reported that for higher education and careers, the school benefited them by allowing them to develop their own interests and by fostering such traits as personal responsibility, initiative, curiosity, ability to communicate well with people regardless of status, and continued appreciation and practice of democratic values. Conclusion. Let it be clear, it is possible to raise independent and happy children that learn joyfully out of their own motivation. Children can learn and explore the world around them in a way that fulfills their genetic expectations. And all this can be done without forced schooling or other forms of coercion. It may not be the easiest way to raise your kids, but for me, it is the most rewarding. A lot more is to be said on the topic of growing up, learning, and unschooling. In the space of this book, we can only touch upon the tip of the iceberg. Conclusion. In the first part of this book, we spoke about raising children. We did not speak so much about how to do things, but more about how to undo things. Our recurring theme was to have a critical look at many of the technical inventions and interventions that have come to dominate birthing and raising children in the past 2 centuries or so. They often seem to get in the way of the natural flow of things. We seem to have lost faith in our biological makeup, which is how millions of years of evolution have adapted us for survival. The pundits might say we need more science, more medicine, more education. I think, without denying the advances modern technology has brought, we mainly need less. We need to do less and reconnect with our instincts. We need to make raising children less clinical and reinvigorate it with some human warmth, compassion, and common sense. Giving birth is not a medical procedure, but a life-changing experience in which the mother's and the baby's comfort and emotional well-being is as important as their medical well-being. Immunity is something we build naturally. Raising infants is not something sterile we do from a distance or outsource to others, but it requires a close, warm, and loving presence. Learning is not some technical intervention that needs to be done by professionals in institutions. It happens naturally in a warm and supportive environment. The latest scientific research is now beginning to confirm what we have always known deep inside and what our ancestors have always practiced. In the past decades, a counter-movement of natural birthing, natural immunity, attachment parenting, and natural learning has come up. We hope these chapters can further that movement and make you want to reconsider the way we have been conditioned by our environment. This may make us more apt at respecting our continuum and will help us grow happier and healthier children, and will probably provide parents with more happiness too. We will end this first part of the book with the words of anthropologist Jared Diamond, who came to a very similar conclusion observing traditional small-scale societies. Westerners who have lived for years in hunter-gatherer societies are struck by the emotional security, self-confidence, curiosity, and autonomy of members of small-scale societies, not only as adults, but already as children. We see that people in small-scale societies spend far more time talking to each other than we do, and they spend no time at all on passive entertainment supplied by outsiders, such as television, video games, and books. We are struck by the precocious development of social skills in their children. These are qualities that most of us admire and would like to see in our own children. But we discourage development of those qualities by ranking and grading our children and constantly telling them what to do. The adolescent identity crisis that plague American teenagers aren't an issue for hunter-gatherer children. The Westerners who have lived with hunter-gatherers and other small-scale societies speculate that these admirable qualities develop because of the way in which their children are brought up, namely with constant security and stimulation as a result of the long nursing period, sleeping near parents for several years, far more social modules available to children through alloparenting, far more social stimulation through constant physical contact and proximity of caretakers, instant caretaker response to a child's crying, and the minimal amount of physical punishment.
This is Orville Radio, Voices from the City of Dawn.